The story will open at Renee's mother's funeral, a storm gathering outside, old family whispers, and a priest mentioning that some doors aren't meant to be reopened. Renee returns alone to the mansion that night and notices one door in the upstairs hall that has been nailed shut from the outside. The rain had started before dawn, soft at first, a mist drifting through the oak trees that lined the Dubois family cemetery. By the time the first mourners arrived, it had turned into a steady, whispering drizzle. Renee Dubois stood beneath a black umbrella, her hands clenched so tightly around the handle that her knuckles were white. The sound of the rain on the umbrella was hypnotic, like the quiet tapping of fingers on a coffin lid. Her mother, Marguerite Dubois, had always said she wanted a simple funeral. No fuss, no flowers, no tears. Yet here they were, rows of people under black umbrellas, watching as the priest spoke words that vanished into the wet Louisiana air. Renee didn't cry. She hadn't cried once since she got the call 2 weeks ago, the call that came at midnight from the hospice nurse. Her mother's heart had simply stopped, as quiet and final as the click of a light switch. When the priest finished, a few relatives approached her, speaking words she couldn't remember later. She was a good woman, a strong woman. She'll be missed. Renee nodded politely. Behind her, she heard someone whisper, "She left that old house to the girl, didn't she?" "Mm-hmm. Poor thing. That house has too many ghosts." Renee turned, but the two women quickly lowered their eyes. Ghosts. She didn't believe in them. She believed in grief, in the weight of old memories. But ghosts? No. The only thing haunting her was the thought of going back to Magnolia House, the 2-story Creole mansion that had belonged to the Dubois family for generations. When the last handful of soil was thrown onto the coffin, Renee stayed behind after everyone left. The rain had washed away the tracks of the mourner's shoes. Only the sound of the dripping trees remained. She crouched near the headstone and whispered, "I'll take care of the house, Mama. I promise." The road back to the property wound through the edge of Street Bernard Parish, where the air smelled faintly of salt and the heavy sweetness of magnolia blooms. When she turned down the gravel drive, her headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the house pale gray, wrapped in iron balconies and climbing ivy. It had been 6 years since she'd last set foot inside. Her mother had insisted on living there alone after Renee moved to Atlanta. They'd talked often, but every conversation had carried a thin thread of distance. Now the house waited, silent, its shutters half closed like weary eyes. Renee parked under the drooping oak, cut the engine, and sat for a long moment before getting out. The rain had eased to a mist again, and the air was thick with humidity. When she stepped onto the porch, the boards creaked softly under her boots. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a small brass key, her mother's house key, still tied to the same faded blue ribbon from years ago. The lock turned with a soft resistance, as if the house had grown used to being shut tight. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The curtains were drawn, the furniture still covered with white sheets. Everything was exactly as she remembered except for the silence. It was a deep kind of silence, not emptiness, but listening. She dropped her suitcase by the door and called softly, "Mama?" Her own voice echoed faintly down the hallway. The kitchen clock was still ticking. The hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet, a low, constant murmur. She moved through the room slowly, touching the edges of furniture, the corners of picture frames. There was her mother's rocking chair by the window, her reading glasses still resting on the small side table beside it. Everything had been left as if Marguerite had simply stepped out and forgotten to return. Upstairs, the long hallway stretched ahead like a throat. The carpet was old, deep burgundy, with faded gold threads. The walls were lined with family portraits, stern faces, sepia eyes that seemed to follow her. Halfway down the hall stood a door tall, wooden, painted in dark blue. The brass knob had dulled with age, and nailed across it, in 2 diagonal lines, were thick wooden boards. Renee froze. She didn't remember that. The rest of the doors were ordinary, leading to guest rooms or storage closets. But this one was sealed. She took a step closer. The boards were old, their nails rusted. Someone had closed it off years ago. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. That room is off limits, baby. Some things are better left untouched. Renee had been 12 the last time she'd heard those words. She remembered her mother locking the door, her hands trembling slightly. She'd never explained why. Renee reached out now, brushing her fingers across the wood. The surface was cold, faintly damp. For a brief second, she thought she heard something behind it. A faint, hollow thud, like the slow beating of a heart deep within the walls. She jerked her hand back, swallowing hard. Probably the house settling, she told herself. Just the old wood shifting. She stepped back and forced a laugh, though her voice sounded thin in the quiet. You're scaring yourself, Renee. She turned and went downstairs, but as she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house had hurt her. That night, she tried to sleep in her old bedroom. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender soap, the kind her mother used to make herself. The rain had stopped, but the wind outside whispered through the branches, making the shutters creak softly. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day the funeral, the whispers, the boarded door. At some point, exhaustion dragged her into sleep. She dreamed of footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps moving down the hall, stopping outside her door, then the faint click of metal like nails being pried loose. When she woke, her room was still and silent. Only the faint tick of the clock on the dresser filled the darkness. But from the hallway came a sound she couldn't mistake, a low, soft creak, as if a door was moving against its hinges. Renee held her breath. Then another creak, longer this time, the kind made by a heavy door shifting just a little. Then silence. She didn't move. She lay there, her eyes open in the dark, her pulse beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. After a long moment, she whispered to herself, "It's the wind." But deep down, she knew the wind didn't open locked doors. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the blinds. Renee forced herself to walk down the hall. The door at the end looked exactly the same, still boarded, still nailed shut. But something was different. One of the boards had shifted. Not much, just slightly loose at one end, like a tooth about to fall out. She reached out, touched it. The nail was halfway pulled out. Her mouth went dry. She stepped back, whispering, "No, no, it's just old wood." But as she turned to leave, she noticed something else. On the floor near the baseboard, a small, pale handprint, perfectly formed in the layer of dust. Too small to be her mother's, too delicate to be hers. Renee stared at it until her heart began to race again. She whispered to the empty hallway, "Who's in this house?" Only the silence answered. The morning passed in uneasy silence. Renee made coffee in the kitchen, the same way her mother used to chicory brew, thick and dark as ink, the kind that left a bitter taste on the tongue. The cup warmed her hands, but did nothing for the chill that had settled under her skin. The handprint wouldn't leave her mind. Small, almost child-sized, too perfect to be random. She'd even crouched again, rubbing it with a towel until the dust smudged, but the faint outline remained as if it were part of the floor itself. She told herself she'd call a carpenter later. Maybe get the boards removed. Or maybe not. Maybe it was better left alone. But the moment she thought that, the word alone echoed too loudly. The house had felt empty last night, yet she could have sworn she'd heard someone moving. By afternoon, a gray light hung in every room. Dust motes floated through the air, catching in the slanted sunbeams. She spent hours sorting through boxes stacked in the sitting room, mostly old letters, faded photographs, and yellowed newspaper clippings her mother had kept. One box was labeled simply, in her mother's tidy cursive, Private M.D., her mother's initials. Renee hesitated, then opened it. Inside were letters tied with a silk ribbon, several journals, and a photograph that made her freeze. It was a picture of her mother in her 20s, standing beside a small cradle. The baby's face was turned away, half hidden by a white blanket. But scrawled in ink across the back of the photo were 3 words that didn't make sense. "For my second child." Renee frowned. Second? She was an only child. Her mother had said it countless times. "You were my miracle, my one and only." She checked the dates the photo was from 1985, the year before Renee was born. She stared at the handwriting. It was unmistakably Marguerite's. A drop of cold sweat rolled down her back. She searched the box again and found one of the journals, dated 1986, 1987. Inside, most pages were ordinary lists of groceries, snippets of recipes, notes about weather, but near the middle, one entry stood out, written in uneven lines. "He's crying again. I told them I can't stand it, but they said it's for the best. I can still hear him at night, through the walls. They promised to take him away soon, before anyone finds out. But sometimes I think he never left." Renee stared at the page until her eyes blurred. He never left. She slammed the journal shut. That evening, she tried to distract herself by cleaning, dusting, polishing, moving furniture, anything that kept her from thinking about what she'd read. But as night fell, the house seemed to expand around her, the walls breathing in slow rhythm. At dinner, she barely ate. The silence pressed in. Then came the sound again. It started faintly, a soft, dragging noise from upstairs. She froze, fork halfway to her mouth. The sound came again, heavier this time, like furniture being moved across wood. She rose slowly from the table. The house creaked as she climbed the stairs. The hallway stretched ahead, dim in the weak light from the wall sconces. The boards beneath her feet groaned softly. When she reached the end of the hall, she saw at the door. The boards still crossed it, but one of them was now hanging by a single nail. The other had split near the middle, the crack dark and jagged. Renee felt her throat tighten. She leaned closer. From behind the door came a faint, rhythmic sound, tap, 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 like a fingernail against wood. She whispered, "Hello?" The tapping stopped. A soft voice, faint, almost a whisper, came through the crack in the door. "Mama?" Renee stumbled back. Who's there?" Silence. Then, just as faint, "Don't leave me in the dark." Her knees nearly gave way. She pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding so hard it hurt. No, it wasn't possible. It wasn't real. She ran down the hall, down the stairs, fumbling for her phone. Her hands shook as she tried to call someone, anyone, but the screen flickered, showing no service. The storm outside had picked up again, wind howling through the trees. She closed all the downstairs windows and turned on every light in the house. But no matter how bright it got, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was moving just beyond the edge of sight, pacing behind that sealed door upstairs. Later that night, she found herself drawn back to the box of journals. She flipped to the last one, the final entry before her mother's handwriting stopped. "The doctor said it was mercy. They said he wouldn't survive the winter, but I hear him every night. I think I sealed him in, not buried him. May God forgive me." The pen marks ended abruptly, cutting off mid-stroke. Renee covered her mouth with her hand. Her heart hammered so loudly that she barely heard the next sound, the faint creak from the upstairs hallway. She looked up. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps, moving across the ceiling. Right above her, then a single knock from the direction of the locked door. She froze, staring at the ceiling. Then another knock. And another, each one deliberate, each one waiting for her to answer. Renee whispered, "No, please stop." The knocking stopped, but from the silence came something worse, a child's faint laugh echoing down through the floorboards. She didn't sleep, not that night. She sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, the house filled with the distant sound of the wind. The laughter never returned. But every now and then, she thought she heard breathing in the walls, soft, ragged, like someone asleep too close. When dawn finally came, she looked up at the stairs. The air smelled faintly of something new, a scent she couldn't place. Sweet. Rotten. Like old milk left out in the Sunday. She knew then that she couldn't stay another night unless she understood what was behind that door. Whatever her mother had done, whatever she'd hidden, it was waiting, and it wanted to be found. The next morning arrived heavy with heat. The storm had passed, but the air in the house was thick and unmoving, like the inside of a sealed jar. Every breath Renee took carried a faint sweetness, the same sour scent she'd noticed before. She spent the early hours pacing, trying to convince herself that last night had been a dream. She'd even gone upstairs again, just after dawn, to see for herself. The door was still nailed shut. The boards looked exactly the same as before, splintered but intact. But on the floor, the handprint was gone. In its place lay a small scrap of paper, yellowed and curled at the edges, as if it had been slipped out from underneath the door. Her pulse quickened as she bent to pick it up. The handwriting was unmistakable, her mother's. "You promised to keep him quiet. You said he wouldn't hurt anyone. Why can't he stop calling my name?" Renee dropped the note as if it had burned her. She left the hallway and went straight to the kitchen. Coffee, sunlight, normalcy. She needed all of it. But her mind wouldn't stay still. The words circled in her head. You promised to keep him quiet. Who was you? She tried to remember anyone from her mother's past who might explain it. Her father had died when she was 9. A car crash on Route 61. Her mother had raised her alone after that. No boyfriends, no other children, no mention of any promises. But the journals, the photograph, there had to be more. By noon, she was back in the parlor, sorting through what she'd missed the first time. Under a stack of yellowing letters tied with lace, she found a smaller envelope, sealed with red wax that had cracked with age. The wax bore an imprint, a small, delicate fleur-de-lis. The envelope was addressed in looping script, to be opened only by Renee, after my passing. Her throat went dry. She turned the envelope over and carefully slid a knife along the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My dearest Renee, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the house is yours. There are things I never told you, things I wanted to forget. You will find them in the East Wing, behind the door I sealed. I only ask that you forgive me before you open it. I did what I thought was right, but right and mercy are not always the same. If you find him, speak softly. He won't understand what happened to him. Mother, Renee sat frozen, reading the letter again and again. If you find him, there was no denying it now her mother had hidden something, someone, behind that door. She went to her mother's bedroom, a place she hadn't entered yet. The air smelled faintly of rose water and camphor. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains drawn. On the dresser lay Marguerite's silver comb, her perfume bottles, her rosary. As Renee opened the top drawer, she found a small black box tucked beneath a stack of scarves. Inside was a rusted iron key. Attached to it was a tag that read simply, East Wing. Her fingers tightened around it. The door. The wood was old. The boards could come off with a crowbar or even a hammer. But now she had the key, the one her mother had apparently hidden all these years. She held it up to the light, the metal glinting faintly. Then, from somewhere down the hall, came a faint thud. Renee froze. Another thud, heavier this time. Then a dragging sound. She turned toward the door, every nerve in her body sparking. "Who's there?" she called. Silence. She took one step toward the hallway, then another. The air grew colder with every step she took. When she reached the staircase, the house was perfectly still again. The kind of stillness that didn't feel empty. It felt paused. Something waiting. That night, she sat in her bedroom with the key on her nightstand. Every few minutes, she'd glance at it, half expecting it to move. The letter replayed in her head. If you find him, speak softly. She didn't know what her mother meant by him. Not really. But the word carried weight, a shape her imagination was already trying to fill. At midnight, she heard the whispering again. Not words this time, just the soft murmur of breath behind a wall. The house creaked, and she thought she heard footsteps moving slowly down the hallway. Then, faintly, a child's voice. "Is it morning yet?" Renee's stomach turned cold. She swung her legs off the bed and grabbed the flashlight from the dresser. The beam cut through the darkness, trembling slightly in her shaking hands. She crept into the hallway. The air here was colder than the rest of the house. The boards beneath her feet groaned as if they were alive. When she reached the end of the hall, the light fell across the locked door, the boards, the brass knob, the cracks in the wood. And there at the base of the door, something new. A folded piece of paper, pushed halfway into view. Renee knelt, picked it up, and unfolded it. This time, the handwriting wasn't her mother's. The letters were uneven, clumsy, written in pencil. "It's so dark. I don't like the dark. Tell Mama I'll be quiet now." Renee dropped the note, her breath catching in her throat. She stepped back and the door moved. Not much. Just an inch. Enough to make the boards groan. She clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. Something pressed softly against the crack between the boards, pale, small, and unmistakably flesh. A hand. She ran. Down the stairs, out the front door, barefoot into the yard. The night air hit her like ice. The moon was half hidden behind the clouds, and the house loomed behind her silent, still, the way an animal looks just before it pounces. Her chest heaved. She thought of getting in the car, driving away, calling the police, but what would she say? My dead mother hid someone in the wall? A child who hasn't aged in 30 years? She pressed her palms against her face. "No," she whispered. "No, I'm imagining things. I haven't slept. That's all." She forced herself to go back inside. When she closed the door, the air inside the house felt different, stiller. The boards upstairs no longer creaked. The silence had weight again, but now it wasn't listening. It was waiting. The next morning, she called a locksmith. He was an older man, gray-haired, soft-spoken. When he arrived, he looked up at the old mansion with a low whistle. "Place like this," he said, "always got secrets, huh?" Renee forced a laugh. "Yeah, you could say that." He followed her upstairs. When they reached the locked door, he frowned. "Well now, that's not just locked, that's sealed." "I have the key," she said quickly, holding it out. He took it, examining it with interest. "This looks like it's from the 1800s. You sure you want to open this?" "Yes." He shrugged and crouched near the door. "All right, miss, your call." He tapped the boards. "These'll have to come off first." She nodded. He began prying at the wood with the end of his crowbar. The nails squealed as they came free. Each board came loose with a groan that echoed through the hallway like a sigh. When the last one fell away, the locksmith turned to her. "There you go." The door stood bare now, the blue paint cracked and peeling. He fit the key into the lock. It turned with a slow, scraping click. "Ready?" he asked. Renee nodded. Her heart was a wild drum. The door creaked open. A gust of air rushed out cold, dry, thick with dust. The locksmith coughed. "Smells like something died in there." Renee raised the flashlight, shining it into the darkness. The beam cut across the room, revealing a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and the faint outline of a child's toys scattered on the floor. She stepped forward slowly, her voice trembling. "Hello?" No answer. Only the soft rattle of wind against the window pane. Then she saw something on the far wall, words scratched into the plaster, crooked and deep. "Mama said don't open the door." You have pretty showed, where Renee discovers what really happened in that room and where the psychological twist begins to surface. That's where truth, guilt, and memory start to blend, until we can't tell what's real anymore. The wind outside had quieted by dawn, but the house had not. The walls seemed to hum softly, as if murmuring behind their plastered skins. Renee hadn't slept. She'd lain awake on the couch downstairs, eyes fixed on the staircase, the shape of the locked door hovering in her mind like a phantom limb. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined what was behind it. A small room, a body, a truth she had spent her entire life stepping around. By morning, her body felt heavy with exhaustion. The light filtering through the lace curtains was gray and grainy. She brewed coffee, not for comfort, but to have something to hold, something real and warm, while the rest of her world blurred. When she opened her mother's drawer in the kitchen for a spoon, she found a small folded note tucked beside the sugar jar. The paper was brittle, edges curled with age. In her mother's delicate handwriting were 4 words. "Do not open the door." Her throat went dry. She stared at the words until they blurred, the looping letters trembling slightly, as if written in fear. It wasn't the first warning she'd found, but it was the first written so plainly and so recently. The ink hadn't fully faded. Renee folded it back, placed it on the counter, and whispered, "I already have, Mama." She spent most of the morning pacing. The key she'd found under the floorboard lay on the coffee table, dull brass catching the light each time she passed it. Around noon, the clouds thinned enough for sunlight to press through the old stained glass of the front door, casting bruised colors across the hall. The house looked peaceful, as if nothing dark had ever happened there. But the quiet had weight now, a silence that seemed to wait for her next move. By 3, Renee couldn't stand it anymore. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand grazing the worn banister polished smooth by generations. When she reached the end of the hall, the locked door was waiting. It looked ordinary white paint peeling, hinges rusted, but the air around it was colder, heavier. The wood was scarred near the handle, as if someone had tried to pry it open long ago. Renee stood there for a long moment, listening. Nothing. No movement, no sound. But that absence itself felt alive. She turned the key in her hand. Her heart beat so loud she thought it might echo down the stairs. The metal slid into the lock. Click. The sound was softer than she expected, anticlimactic even, but her breath caught. She pushed the door slowly. The hinges gave a low groan, a sigh, and stale air rushed out thick, cold, and faintly sweet like rotted fruit. The room was small, barely larger than a closet. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light leaking from a crack in the boarded window. A bed frame leaned against one wall, stripped bare. A small writing desk stood near the window, its surface scattered with yellowed pages. And then she saw it on the opposite wall, a mirror. Tall, cracked across the center, draped partially with a lace cloth. Her reflection stared back at her, but for a moment she thought it wasn't her at all. The eyes seemed sharper, the mouth slightly off. She took a hesitant step closer. The floor creaked beneath her. The air felt denser. The papers on the desk caught her attention. She brushed away the dust and read the top one. The handwriting was her mother's, elegant, looping, but the words chilled her. Renee must never remember. Her breath hitched. She flipped through the stack letters, journal entries, unfinished notes, all written to someone named Clara. Clara. That name she had heard it once before, when she was very young. Her mother had whispered it in her sleep one night, then denied it the next morning. She kept reading. Clara's temper frightens me, the way she watches from the mirror as if waiting to step through. I cannot let her out again. Renee dropped the paper. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. She turned toward the mirror, drawn to it against her will. The crack down the center split her reflection in two, one side bathed in light, the other swallowed by shadow. For a second, she thought she saw the dark half blink out of sync with her own. She stepped closer. Whispers rose faintly not from the room, but from behind the glass, like words trapped in water. She could almost make them out. Renee, let me out. Her knees went weak. She stumbled back, bumping into the desk. The papers fluttered to the ground like pale wings. The sound jolted her back into motion. She grabbed one of the fallen pages, another note. The ink was smeared but legible. If she ever finds this room, Tell her the truth. She was never alone. Her mind spun. She clutched the paper, staring blankly at the mirror. The reflection's lips were moving, but she wasn't speaking. Her voice had gone dry in her throat. The wind outside picked up suddenly, rattling the boards on the window. The light flickered. Renee stumbled backward out of the room and slammed the door shut. For a long time, she stood there, forehead pressed against the wood, breath shallow, heart trembling. The paper still crumpled in her hand. The key, the same one that had opened the door, still hung from the lock. She turned it once more, sealing the room again. And as the latch clicked back into place, a sound echoed faintly from within. A single knock. Soft. Answering her. Renee didn't tell anyone about the room, not the lawyer, not the neighbors. But that night, as she sat in her mother's old bedroom, she placed the journal pages in her lap and began reading again. Her mother's last entry was dated only 2 weeks before she died. Clara has grown restless. The mirror calls to her at night. I see her standing at the end of the hall, watching. I have locked the door again, but I fear when I am gone, she will have no one left to hold her back. The page ended there. Renee read it 3 times, hands trembling, until a single drop of water fell on the paper, but when she touched her cheek, it was dry. She looked up. The ceiling was dry too. Then she saw it. In the vanity mirror across the room, her reflection standing just slightly out of step, head tilted, smiling faintly. She blinked. It smiled wider. Morning came slowly, filtering through gauzy curtains and pale light. Renee sat at the edge of her mother's bed, still in the same clothes she'd worn the night before. The papers were scattered around her like wilted petals. The mirror across the room still draped with a shawl she'd thrown over it some time before dawn. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the reflection smiling where she hadn't. Every time she blinked, she heard that knock faint, polite, patient. She'd thought about leaving, packing her car, driving anywhere that didn't smell like her mother's perfume and mildew. But something inside her wouldn't let her go. She needed to know. By afternoon, the lawyer arrived, Mr. Darnell, a polite man with thinning hair and a leather briefcase. He'd come to finalize her mother's estate, a formality, he said, though his eyes darted uneasily around the house, as if the wallpaper itself were watching. They sat in the parlor, where sunlight filtered through dust like slow snow. He unfolded the documents, his voice soft and rehearsed. Most of it was routine. Property deeds, small investments, the old car. Then, as he flipped to the last page, he hesitated. "There's something else," he said carefully. "Your mother left an additional envelope, sealed separately. She wrote a note requesting it only be opened by you, and only in this house." Renee's stomach tightened. "Where is it?" He reached into his case and produced a plain white envelope, the paper slightly yellowed. Her mother's handwriting looped elegantly across the front. "For my daughter, Renee, when she is ready." Renee held it for a long moment. Her fingers trembled. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, offered his condolences, and left quietly, closing the door behind him. For several minutes, Renee didn't move. The silence pressed in, thicker now, heavier. Finally, she tore the envelope open. Inside were only 2 things: a short handwritten letter and a photograph. The photo was old, black and white. 2 little girls, identical, standing in front of the same mansion she was sitting in now. Both smiling, both wearing the same white dress. Her mother stood behind them, younger, proud, one hand on each shoulder. Renee's breath caught. She flipped the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, Renee and Clara, summer 1988. Her hand shook so badly the photo almost slipped from her grasp. She read the letter next. "My dearest Renee, if you are reading this, it means I have failed to keep the promise I made long ago to protect you both. You were born with a twin, though the doctors told me only one of you survived. But they were wrong. Clara was different. Not sick, Not evil, just shadowed, living half inside, half outside. She saw things you couldn't, heard things I tried to silence. As you grew, I realized she wasn't gone. She lived through you, speaking in dreams, staring from mirrors. I feared the day you'd remember her. I did what I thought was right. I locked her away, sealed her reflection in the attic mirror, where she could not reach you. I prayed she would fade with time, but she never did. Be careful, my love. Some doors don't stay closed forever. Renee's pulse thundered in her ears. She set the letter down slowly, the words echoing in her skull. The mirror in the attic, the journal entries, the voice whispering her name. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, clutching the photo. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't losing her mind. Or was she? That night, she walked the hall again. The storm had returned, thunder rolling over the Mississippi like the slow turn of a drum. The boards creaked under her bare feet. The door at the end of the hall waited, locked again. But she didn't bring the key this time. She didn't need it. As she approached, the air grew colder, sharp enough to sting her throat. Rain lashed the windows, and from the other side of the door came a soft, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. She pressed her ear to the wood. The knocks stopped. Then, Renee, a whisper, her own voice, perfectly echoed, muffled by the wall between them. She stumbled back, her spine hitting the opposite wall. Her chest heaved. Go away, she whispered. You're not real. The whisper came again, softer now, pleading. Let me out. You locked me away, but you need me. Don't you remember? Her hand hovered over the doorknob. Her pulse raced. She could feel it a pull. Magnetic, ancient. Then, from the far end of the hall, a mirror she hadn't noticed before, one of the old decorative ones, caught the lightning. For an instant, in its reflection, she saw two figures, herself and another, standing just behind her shoulder. Smiling, she spun around. The hallway was empty. The storm boomed. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out. When they came back, the next morning sun found the house silent again. The door at the end of the hall stood open. The bed in the guest room was neatly made, and on the writing desk lay the photo of the two girls, placed perfectly in the center. Only one difference: someone had scratched out one of the faces. The name beneath it, once written in neat ink, now read only Clara. Later that week, the Hamiltons across the street swore they saw Renee leaving at dawn carrying a suitcase. They said she looked peaceful, almost lighter. No one saw her again. The house remained empty for months until the realtor came to prepare it for sale. When he climbed the stairs, he found the attic door locked tight, a single faint handprint on the inside of the glass panel. A year later, a young couple bought the Dubois house. They painted the walls, replaced the creaky floors, filled it with laughter and modern furniture. One evening, as the new wife unpacked boxes in the hall, she paused at the far end, where a freshly painted door gleamed white under the light. She frowned. I thought this room didn't have a lock, she said, trying the handle. Her husband, downstairs, called back, It doesn't. Probably just stuck. She shrugged, turned away, but before she reached the stairs, she heard it. A soft knock, 3 times. Slow, deliberate. She froze. The air in the hall turned cold, faintly sweet like old perfume and rotted fruit. Then, from behind the door, a whisper barely audible under the hum of the house. Let me out. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button. It helps the darkness spread. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the line between memory and madness blurs. Turn on the bell icon so you don't miss what comes next.